Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
I think there's been a theme throughout, but I'll just circle back to the most important thing when you think about our company and the customers that we serve. And that's just anchoring in for any listener to try to better understand what it's like to be an immigrant if they're not. If they are, then I think that it's super important in all the things that I speak on to just educate folks around the immigrant journey, around the diversity of our customers, but also the commonality in terms of the sacrifices they make, the impact they make, the just remarkable human beings that they are.
That was Matt Oppenheimer, the co-founder and CEO of Remitly, and he is our special guest on this episode 166 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Matt has a burning desire to take the road less traveled and a passion for interacting authentically with others who have different lived experiences. He comes from a family of entrepreneurs and always knew he wanted to start a business that would make a positive impact on the world. In Kenya, Matt saw firsthand the challenges that come with cross-border payment remittance, and thus Remitly was born with a vision to transform the lives of immigrants and their families by providing the most trusted financial remittance services on the planet. According to Matt, Remitly is doing for remittance what Amazon did for e-commerce. They have 22 different send countries with 130 receive countries in their portfolio. Matt and I go on to discuss his journey to starting the company and some thoughts on where Matt thinks the space is headed next. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Matt. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. Great to see you.
Yeah, let's dive right in if you don't mind. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Where I grew up, fifth generation Idahoan, grew up in Boise, Idaho. Started, if we think about fintech, my journey was to Barclays Bank first after business school. I went to undergrad at Dartmouth, business school at Harvard, and then I joined Barclays Bank in their corporate bank in London. And then I moved to Nairobi, Kenya. Took the road less traveled, so to speak, and was head of mobile and internet banking initiatives for Barclays Bank Kenya. It was there that I saw, how hard it was to send money internationally myself. I was getting paid in British pounds, living in Kenyan shillings. Eventually, I had to get money back to US dollars. But I saw how much more painful and more important, quite frankly, it was for a lot of my Kenyan friends that had relatives in Europe and in the US to get money back for basic living expenses, et cetera. And so that combined with M-Pesa, transforming domestic financial services in Kenya, that's a mobile wallet there that's very well used, led me to start the business about 10 plus years ago.
Well, let's talk about the business. So tell the audience what Remitly does.
Yeah, absolutely. So our vision is to transform the lives of immigrants and their families by providing the most trusted financial services on the planet. So the way to think about us is a leading digital services provider for immigrants and their families. Our first and largest area is remittances. And we sent about $20 billion last year. Ultimately, when I started the business 10 years ago, there's definitely a cost component. We're working towards achieving things like the UN development goal of bringing remittances down below 3% across the globe. And there is certainly a fee component, but ultimately what we're known for our customers is building peace of mind. And that is something that is critical for our customers. If you think about how they are sending a large percentage of their hard-earned money home, and how that might be scary for them to provide a lot of information about themselves that we need to collect for compliance and security reasons. And then they're trusting us to deliver it back home, hundreds or thousands of miles away. And so that process is critical to get right for our customers, and it's really complex. Some of your listeners probably know the complexities within payments when you think about the disbursement network, the risk systems, et cetera. But ultimately, with our scale, size, growth rate, what we build and deliver to our customers is peace of mind and a really easy, seamless, trusted way to get money back home.
Okay, so is the process or the use case they get paid for their job through a typical payroll, so they have money sitting in a bank account that then needs to be transferred to friends or family? Is that the right way to look at it?
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. And we've served over 5 million customers across 2,000 corridors. If I use the word corridor, it means, US to Mexico versus Canada to Mexico versus UK to Philippines. Each of those are specific corridors. So our customers are incredibly diverse. But yes, that's exactly, the experience is they link their bank account or their debit card, whatever payment instrument they have in one of 22 countries that we originate from. And then they send money predominantly to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we can enable our customers to send money back to their families to be picked up in cash at hundreds of thousands of cash pickup locations, to be delivered into bank accounts instantly to billions of bank accounts across the globe, or to deliver to things like mobile wallets like M-Pesa, hundreds of millions of mobile wallets across the globe. In some countries, we even do door-to-door delivery. That's very popular in some countries, where a courier will come and deliver money to our customers' families' doors. So it really varies. Our customers are amazingly diverse, but that's the experience.
I would assume that your customers are really the consumer. So how do you acquire a new customer?
Well, a lot of it is around building that trusted brand within the communities that we serve. And then the word of mouth, the referral system. We have, both word of mouth as well as a paid referral system where we incentivize our customers when they're having a great experience to share Remitly with their friends. We also have a range of, advertising channels, whether those are digital advertising channels, offline channels, et cetera. But we think about it pretty quantitatively to make sure that the marketing dollars that we're spending are predominantly for building that top of funnel customer trust. And then we measure that customer acquisition cost. And then we measure equally the long-term relationship we have with customers. And we quantify that in terms of lifetime value. But we value that and view that really as a long-term relationship with our customers, initially with remittances. And then we've started to add some other products and services that we can also deliver to our customers to improve their lives.
So do you do anything through different partners, or is it basically direct to consumer?
We do have a product called Remitly for Developers. That is basically came from businesses coming to us and saying, wow, you can deliver to all of those disbursement options. And that's via, by the way, over 100 direct integrations. Like, it's a core competency of ours that's an area of expertise across the globe with, emerging markets, financial services institutions, and banks. So we built an API, and businesses can now integrate with that API and then disperse funds to their customers via our network. We just announced that relatively recently, year and a half ago. So it's relatively new. So most of what we do is direct to consumer, but we've also learned that a lot of what we've built has value to businesses potentially as well.
And then you mentioned the corridors. So can you maybe dive a little deeper into that? Like, how many countries or regions or whatever you can disclose, sort of, is it all truly global, or are there restrictions in certain places?
Yeah, so we send across 2,000 corridors. And what that means is, because there's a combinatoric effect, right? We send from 22 send countries, and that's predominantly in North America. So like, US, Canada, a range of European countries where our customers live. And then a few APAC countries like Australia, Singapore, et cetera. In order to launch a new send country, to your point around restrictions, you have to have all of the money transmission licensing. That's a core competency of ours. You also have to do some of the, local compliance, KYC, know your customer, payment acceptance, et cetera. But that's on the origination side. And then we send to just over 130 receive countries in again, predominantly Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And so those are the main geographies that we serve.
You've mentioned core competencies a couple of times, so it's a good segue into the next question. What would you say differentiates your company from your competitors out there?
Our core value proposition is really around the trust, the peace of mind, the reliability, which includes having a fair and transparent price, but is much broader, given the importance of trust and given the complexity of delivering trust, some of those core competencies I mentioned. That is what differentiates us. That's what customers come to us for. And remittances are a lot more complex than meets the eye. I think that in a lot of ways, what Amazon did for e-commerce originally, and the scale and size and flywheel effect that they had as a obviously digital disruptor is similar to what we're doing for the remittance business. With a package, it was clear that the complexity and the operational excellence required to do that was large. With remittances, it's actually quite similar, but it's a little bit more complex than meets the eye, given the intangibility of money and not necessarily understanding, although again, some of your listeners may, in payments, the complexity that comes with, various risk systems to deliver funds instantly, disbursement network, obviously a best-in-class user experience that connects all of that together. So for us, it's peace of mind, it's trust, reliability, and it's a fair and transparent price.
Can you tell us about the size of the company, whatever you can disclose, number of employees or sales or whatever you can disclose?
We have close to 2,000 employees across the globe and really offices all over the world. And in terms of scale and size, last year we enabled our customers to send just over $20 billion, and we grew 78% year on year last year. So a lot of good growth and scale, which enables us to invest a lot more in those systems that I mentioned. And that's the flywheel effect that I mentioned to continue to deliver peace of mind for our customers.
So these employees that you have around the world, are they typically people who know those countries really well and know the risks and all the complexities of those specific countries?
It is an amazingly diverse team. Understanding the customer experience. So one of our large receive markets is the Philippines, as an example. We have a large team of direct employees in the Philippines that obviously speak English, but also Tagalog. Our customers really appreciate that. Many of our team members in the Philippines know what it's like to be, as they describe it, an OFW, overseas Filipino worker. They may have family members or relatives, given that I think about close to 10% of GDP in the Philippines comes from remittances. And so there's certainly both the language, the localization, and then the customer understanding that I think is inherent with some of our global team. And a lot of those team members are customer support or customer protection associates that are interacting directly with customers. So it's a win-win from that perspective.
Well, where do you see this remittance area of payments headed in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think what's happened, and I think will arguably continue to happen, is there's a shift from offline cash-based remittance. So instead of using our app or going to our website, 75+%, it's hard to get a perfect number, but 75 to 85% of customers are still going to a physical cash location and giving physical cash to an agent to be sent back home. Well, that might sound foreign to us. Again, it comes back to trust. And I think what is happening and what was accelerated by COVID, but now is kind of continuing to now have a tipping point effect, call it, is that customers are now trusting digital devices as opposed to that physical agent, or getting over that initial trust concern, or talking to their friends who may have used a digital provider like Remitly. And so I think that you'll see the amount of remittances originated digitally continue to rise. And I think with that, there'll be a few players that have the scale, size, customer centricity, operational excellence to really transform how remittances are sent internationally. I think that that's something that will happen and has happened over the last 5 or 10 years, but will continue to grow.
I would assume there's a cost difference between walking into a physical location versus doing it digitally.
There is. Yeah. And that's when I say we provide a fair and transparent price. We're not always the best price, but what you're seeing in the industry, our prices are in the 2 to 2.5% range is what we shared during our last earnings. Over the last 8 quarters, it's been in the 2 to 2.5% take rate range. So fee and foreign exchange combined divided by total amount sent. If you look at the industry average, according to the World Bank, I believe it's in the kind of 6 to 7% range. If you look at the digital providers, they're all in the similar range to us. Again, we're not always the best. But I think as the world shifts digital, to your point, takes costs out of the system, that brings the cost down at an industry level. But then there's kind of a stabilization at that new equilibrium of digital competitors once you've taken those costs out of the system.
Do you think crypto or blockchain ledger technology is going to play in this space in the future?
Yeah. I think that it is a space that we not only watch closely, but are active in, because I think that it's, in terms of crypto broadly, there's a ton happening in the space and a lot of obviously exciting components. How it pertains to remittances, I think, is still to be determined. And that's why we're active in the space. We partnered with Facebook's product Novi as a Remitly for Developers customer. We've also partnered with Coinbase as a Remitly for Developers customer. We obviously can't share the results of the uptake of those, but it's something that we're continuing to engage closely in. What I would say at a high level is, again, as the business comes down to trust, and you think about the regulatory barriers, the risk systems, a lot of the complexity that's inherent in remittances, the question remains, how does crypto solve that? And are those things solved by technology, or are they inherently regulatory and other problems that need to be solved? I don't know the answer to those things. That's why we partner. That's why we stay close. But it's, I think, a question that remains as the crypto space continues to evolve.
We talk a lot about crypto in this part of the interviews just because it's future. I mean, do you feel like that's 5 years away or 10 years away, or do you kind of have a view on when you think it could be more realistic?
I think the question is, the way I'd answer it now is broadly crypto is here now. It's not a 5 or 10 year away instance. The question is, what pain points will crypto and Web3 really solve and help transform? And I think you've already seen some of that with, an alternative asset class that is Bitcoin and various other asset classes. I think there's some really interesting things happening in the NFT space and the whole concept of digital ownership. I think as it pertains to financial services and remittances, I think that story is hard to give a timeline to, and also hard to talk about generically or broadly, because I think it's still to be determined which problems Web3 and crypto will solve in that space. But what I know that we will do and have done is partner, stay very close, invest in the space directly ourselves, such that we are, helping lead the way to the extent that it can solve problems in the remittance and broader, financial services space.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. And you've mentioned a little bit about your background, but maybe, talk about, so you left college, went to work for Barclays, and then you saw a problem in the industry and you wanted to figure out how to solve it. Maybe tell us what those days look like when you said, hey, here's a business opportunity. How did you take the next step?
Yeah, great question. And I think that the interesting thing is I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So you go back to even like the gold rush in Idaho, and my family immigrated from primarily Germany and set up the local mercantile store in Boise. My dad and uncle run a business that my grandfather started. And so I'd always been drawn to entrepreneurship, and I always knew I wanted to start a business. I always knew I wanted to start a business that would make an impact and a positive impact in the world. It didn't necessarily have to be a technology business, but I was drawn to technology because I thought that inherent in technology is the ability to scale and make a bigger impact. So I knew that in college. I knew that as I applied to business school. I knew that as I continued my career, I wanted to get a general management program because I wanted to have, this was not investment banking. This was retail and commercial banking. I've always been very global. I've traveled to close to 100 countries. And so post-business school, I wanted to, as I said, take the road less traveled to expose myself to global problems that were potentially more meaningful to solve, as opposed to problems that, you might find sitting in a nice office in Seattle or San Francisco. But I was patient around trying to find a problem that had an impact and trying to find a problem that I wanted to commit 10 plus years of my life to solving. Because there's rarely overnight successes in entrepreneurship. It's a longer journey. That led me to Kenya. And I say the problem I wanted to solve, not the solution. I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs that are experienced know, but a lot of new entrepreneurs don't, which is they fall in love with the product they build and they're too rigid because often there need to be pivots along the way. For me, I fell in love with the problem that sending remittances and sending money internationally was fundamentally broken in my view. And when you look at the $1.6 trillion that is sent every year, and you look at the sacrifices that immigrants make to move away from their families, people are moving away from their kids, their parents, their close family members in order to build a better life for themselves and their family back home. But there are huge sacrifices that come with that. And both the amount of money and therefore savings as part of that industry shift that I mentioned, and the amount of good that we could do for customers who deserve a better solution was a problem that really fired me up and a problem that really I wanted to solve. And so I was patient. I knew I wanted to start a business probably 5 years, 10 years before being in Kenya. In Kenya, I saw that. And it was indicative of, again, traveling to close to 100 countries and seeing how far remittances went in a lot of countries that I had visited and how sustainable they were. But it was most poignant in Kenya. And then there were a whole bunch of pivots I can talk about around pivots towards solving that problem that I mentioned. But that was the journey to find the problem.
You have other co-founders as well?
Yep. So Shavas Gulati, our first co-founder, I met once I moved back to Boise. I was entrepreneur in residence at the only venture capital firm in Boise, Idaho called Highway 12 Ventures. I met him via that network and the Techstars network. We then were in Techstars Seattle 2011, and I moved from Boise to Seattle. So I went Nairobi, Boise for a few months, and then Boise, Seattle. I knew Seattle was going to be a better place to build a business. And in Techstars, our star mentor is what they called it then, Josh Hugg, had, been a successful entrepreneur, built and sold a company called Shelfari to Amazon. And he was our mentor, but we loved working together. He was looking for a strong CEO to partner with. I was looking for somebody who was a very strong product leader and somebody who I could learn from. And he joined. And so those are the three co-founders. And then, from there, the rest is history, as they say.
Great. So what are some things you're passionate about? So maybe one work-related passion and one personal passion.
Oh, there's several I could choose from. I'll probably choose culture, which if you ask me what both keeps me up at night and what I spend a lot of my time on, it is building the right culture, which means defining the culture. You can see those in our cultural values on our website. It means refreshing that culture on a regular basis. It means integrating that culture in an intentional way into the interview process and performance review process. Anyway, I could talk a lot about culture. That's what I'm passionate about on the work front. On the personal front, I'm a big runner. I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. That's my happy place. And so I especially love running in new and different places. I try to do a marathon once a year. I love traveling. I love interacting during my journeys, and part of running, although separate, I'd say a passion is, I think a lot of people are drawn to similarity and drawn to people who are similar to them. I think I'm drawn to travel, to interacting in an authentic way with people that are very different than who I am. And that's always really fueled me because I've always learned so much from people who have very different lived experiences and just really listening and learning from their lived experience.
Yeah, I want to talk about culture for just a second because we did have your head of HR on our diversity and inclusion month a couple of months ago, and I thought it was fascinating, and maybe you can speak to it a little bit about how your culture matches your customers. You know what I mean? And just that's an interesting point that I think a lot of people don't think about as they're building culture. So can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, great. And that's great. You had our head of HR on. I think that, there's aspects of our culture. I think if you think about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that we both diverse candidates are drawn to Remitly, given our mission. And then I think we work hard to create a more inclusive environment. And I think in turn, that helps us serve our customers better. It's not like we've arrived at a destination on that front, by the way. We have a lot of work to do, just like society. But I think it's something that's a deeply held value for us. I think the other element is, our customers are full of heart and perseverance. And I think that there's an element of that is true within our team as well. And I think they're drawn by purpose and drawn by our one value that has never changed across all the refreshes and is always at the top. And then there are no particular order is customer centricity. And so I also think that there's an element of a lot of our team that relates to our mission either directly or indirectly. And with that, there's just fewer politics, more rooted in purpose, in mission, in doing what's right, and all being aligned that we're all here to serve our customers at the end of the day. So I do think there's, a lot of interaction between our culture and our mission and vision of what we're doing.
Final question. When I started in payments 16 years ago, there wasn't really, it was like, the bricks on a table and you swipe the card. I mean, there wasn't even EMV and dipping and all that. I mean, it was debit credit processing basically. And now obviously with the advent of fintech and the amount of money that's been invested in this space, it's just, it's a pretty hot environment, a hot sector to work in. And kids in college these days can actually take fintech courses. So I think they come out of college, some of them looking at this industry as a place to build a career. So, as someone who's been in the industry for 10 plus years, what advice would you give someone coming out of college or maybe changing from another industry? What would you tell them they should do to be successful in this space?
Yeah, great question. And your journey, by the way, like you said, at JP Morgan, I saw you were there for a bunch of years, and similar to my Barclays experience, you've seen that, and then you've obviously interviewed and stay close to so many fintech companies. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But what I would say for folks specifically interested in fintech, I'd say first and foremost, life's too short not to do things that matter. And so I think I'd commend somebody interested in fintech for narrowing down that they are interested in a specific subsector. Because I think a big part of especially early career development is narrowing down the area that you're interested in. But then within that area, it's a wide range. And so once you've narrowed it down to that area, use the next kind of narrowing down as companies that you really respect, their mission, their vision, their culture, because life's too short not to do things that matter and care a lot more about that than some of the other, I don't know, like hype that can happen in fintech, because there is a lot of that at times. So that's probably the main advice I'd give. And then there's, more tactical advice when it comes to fintech. Once somebody's joined and started the journey, that I think is important, things like regulation, things like risk systems. It's different than other industries, other disruptive industries. Those things are there for a reason. Consumer protection is super important. Compliance, not sending money, not blocking platforms in our instance from nefarious actors using them. Security. The business all comes down to trust. And so I think to the extent somebody's coming from another industry within tech that didn't take those rules seriously, I think one of the things that's defining within fintech is it's fin and tech. And the tech side, I think, is crucial and often leads the way to build a great customer experience. But there has to be the financial services respect and admiration and understanding for why it's there, because there's a real purpose to it.
That's great advice. Any thoughts on starting with a big company versus a startup?
It's an interesting question. When I think of big company, I first went to like legacy financial services providers, but obviously there's a lot of large fintech companies out there now. And I think those can be great training grounds, especially larger companies that are growing, larger fintech companies that are growing faster, where there's still that growth opportunity, because that's what you get in a smaller company is just the growth. For high performers, you're stretched. But I do think that a larger company, especially for folks early in their career, can come with a little bit more training, development, intentionality, structure. So I think it depends on the candidate, depends on how important that is. Some people can really thrive without much of that. If you need that, or if you don't know if you need that, then a mid to later stage or larger fintech company might be the best bet for a first job.
I think that's all very good advice. Well, Matt, we've covered a lot of ground about the company and where you see the industry heading, and obviously about you and the journey of starting the company. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss before we wrap up?
I think there's been a theme throughout, but I'll just circle back to the most important thing when you think about our company and the customers that we serve. And that's just anchoring in for any listener to try to better understand what it's like to be an immigrant. If they're not, if they are, then I think that it's super important in all the things that I speak on to just educate folks around the immigrant journey, around the diversity of our customers, but also the commonality in terms of the sacrifices they make, the impact they make, the just remarkable human beings that they are. So I'd end with that, and with appreciation for all that immigrants have done to being in the U.S. today, build our country, and to build a better life for themselves, their families back home, and the countries that they move to.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. What's the best way for people to learn more about Remitly?
You can go to our site, remitly.com. And from a career standpoint, there's a career page there. Obviously, from a customer standpoint, you can download our app and use it there. But yeah, our website is the best for learning more about career opportunities.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. I know your time is very valuable, so thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.